I've never really not written, never not had another world of my own making to escape to. Never known how to be in this world without most of my soul dreaming up and living in another. Hello friends, welcome back to the Eerie Fairy Tales. My name is Letty. So glad you joined me for today on my last wrap up for 2023. And I had a pretty good month to round up the year, so I'm happy about that. I am planning on doing a few roundup videos for 2023. I'm going to do a video where they're kind of like an award show in a way, not really like a full-on show, but you know, like superlatives, so like favorite cover, favorite new author to me, stuff like that, so I can talk about more than just my 10 favorite books of the year. So I will be doing that as well, my 10 favorite books of the year, and I'm also going to do my disappointing reads of the year, of which there are only about 5 or so that's not too bad. And then I'm also planning on doing my reading and channel goals for 2024. So just some quick stats. I read 2 short stories, 2 novellas, and 6 novels. I read a total of 2,487 pages, which is about 80 pages a day. And the genres I read were sci-fi, fantasy, classic, mystery, thriller, and horror, and also a kind of weird literary fiction, dark academia kind of book. And I read 1 disappointing book, a few that I liked, a few that I loved, and 1 favorite, which was actually highly anticipated for me, a very hyped up book, and fortunately for me, it did live up to the hype. Hello friends, Editing Letty here, and I totally forgot to mention a whole book that I read. I don't know how I did that. Well, actually, I kind of do, because for some reason I took this book out of my read pile and I put it back in with my novellas. Usually I keep them all together until I do my wrap up, so I don't know why I did that. Anyway, so I read 3 novellas, not 2, and that brings my total pages read to 2,646, which brings my daily average page count to 85 instead of 80, so that's pretty good. And I'll go ahead and insert the clip of that book in the appropriate spot. So as usual, I'm going to go over the books in ranking order, least favorite to most favorite. I'll start out with one that I only read part of, and I'll be finishing up hopefully this month in January. Then I'll do a couple short stories, couple novellas, and then the novels. So the first book that I started and did not finish yet is out by Natsuo Kirino, and this is a Japanese crime thriller novel, and this is pretty good. I just got to the part where she kills her husband, and now she got her friends to go help her. Okay, the first book I'm going to talk about, this is unfortunately the disappointing one, and that is The Luminous Dead by Caitlin Starling, and this is a sci-fi thriller, maybe horror. It's 411 pages, however, it's not really any type of thrilling or horrific. Yeah, so this is set on a different planet in a cave system. We have this lady who is going on a cave expedition, and she basically lies about her experience to get this job, but there's also something weird with the person who hired her, and she is going to get a lot of money from this expedition, so she's willing to do it because they're on this other planet and she wants to get off the planet and go on another one, kind of like an Earth-like planet. So she's willing to do this really risky thing. She's down there, and supposedly there are these creatures called the tunnelers, which don't really play that big a part in the book, not as much as I was hoping anyway. She's having trouble distinguishing what she's seeing. Like, is she just hallucinating, or is she seeing the ghost of the people who have gone down there before her? Because they've sent some people down on this expedition before and none of them have made it out. So again, really risky, but she's willing to do it for the money. And they're really only like a couple times where I felt like that anxiety kind of feeling or claustrophobic. Yeah, just not as much as I was expecting. And I'm a pretty visual reader. I'm really good at picturing what I'm reading. It's almost like a movie is playing in my head. But in this one, I had trouble orientating myself in the story and like figuring out where she was going. And fortunately, they did include a map in the front. So I was like, okay, you know what? Let me compare. I read it, I look at the map, and I'm like, Okay, that still doesn't make sense. Read it. I look at the map. I'm like, that still doesn't make sense. And it still didn't make sense when I was trying to compare the writing to the map. So I don't know. Maybe that's a me thing. Or maybe the writing and the map don't really match. I don't know. If anybody else has read this, what did you think about that? Were you able to follow along where she was in the cave system and match it up to what the map said? I don't know. I'm curious. Maybe it was just me. I don't know. So unfortunately, this was a little boring for most parts, and I skimmed over a lot. I would just skim over, kind of like glance through it really quickly, see if there was anything important, that I was gonna miss. Because some of it also seemed repetitive a little bit. So unfortunately, not the spooky read I was anticipating, and I gave it 2.5 stars. I gave it 2.5 because it's right in the middle of a 5-star. Probably won't rate anything lower than a 2.5 because at that point I probably will just DNF it. So a 2.5 means that I wasn't thrilled about it, but I was curious enough to find out how it was going to end. And the first short story I'm going to talk about is Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang, and that short story is 54 pages, and so I didn't read the whole book, just the one short story. And that story, Story of Your Life, how many times can I say story, is the story that the movie Arrival is based on. So it's a first contact type of story. And so we follow a doctor who is recruited by the military to go figure out what the aliens are saying, translate and communicate with them. And you kind of flip between two different timelines between that timeline, and then you go back towards when she's with her husband and her daughter's born, and then you go to the current timeline, and then you go back in time to where the daughter's a little older, and then current timeline, and then back to when the daughter's even a little bit older, and it kind of continues like that until the daughter hits a certain age, and something happens, like a pretty big thing happens both in her personal life having to do with her family, and then also how it ends with the aliens. Now, I did enjoy this while I was reading it. However, I don't really remember any more details other than that. So I would probably have to read it again. But I didn't find anything wrong with it. Again, it's not hugely memorable for me. So I just give it a 3-star. And the next short story I have is Harrison Bergeron by Kurt Vonnegut, and that short story is 8 pages, super short. Again, I just read the one story out of this whole book, and there is a film adaptation of this short story. Yes, they somehow turned 8 pages into a fantastic movie. It's from the 90s. It has Sean Astin in it. It's free here on YouTube, so I'll link it down below. I know I've mentioned it a couple times, but it is really good. I really loved what they did with the concept of this story. And in the story, it's a world where they don't like people to be above average. Like, they don't want people too smart. They don't want people too talented. And so they give people medicine to take, and they do like brain zaps. Basically, they have like a contraption on their head, I think, or some kind of implant. And so when they feel like somebody needs to be checked and knocked down a peg or two, they hit them with a little brain zap, and it kills their memory. It knocks them down, so nobody can really excel at anything. Well, there is one character, Harrison, who breaks the mold. And I just love this story idea. It is so creepy to think about, and I gave it 3.5 stars. And the first novella I'm going to talk about is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, and this is 127 pages. And I primarily listen to this via audiobook. There is a really good audiobook here on YouTube. It's free. I'll link it down below. The guy did an excellent job with the voices, the pacing. It even has sound effects. Seriously, it's probably one of the best audiobooks I've ever heard. I'm sure we're all familiar with this story. Scrooge, who's really cheap and stingy, doesn't care about his employees, doesn't care about giving to charity, doesn't care about anybody but himself. And he used to have an ex-business partner who died some years ago who also lived the same kind of stingy life. Well, on this Christmas Eve, he gets visited by the spirit of his ex-partner, who is basically suffering in the afterlife. He is regretting all the choices he made in life. He is being bound by all these heavy chains, and he doesn't want the same fate for his friend Scrooge. So he comes to visit him. He's like, yo, dude, you gotta act right. I'm gonna show you some things. I'm gonna have 3 spirits come visit you: the ghost of Christmas past, the ghost of Christmas present, and the ghost of Christmas future. And you're gonna see some things. So Scrooge goes on this wild ride, and he is actually really freaked out by it. And he wakes up Christmas Day. He's relieved to find he hasn't missed Christmas, and he has time to rectify and make things right. And so he gives a charity. He gives his employee's family a fat turkey for Christmas dinner, and he totally changes his ways. Now he's all happy and not grumpy anymore. So it's a nice uplifting story. I'm gonna make it a tradition to read this every Christmas Eve, and I do have a better edition of this coming. This one is just like, I think it's part of the public domain, so anybody can basically self-publish it. And this one has major typos just on the back here, and I don't know about any of you, but that really bothers me. So I have a better edition on the way. It's like more of a replica of the original, so I'm just going to donate this to a little free library. This is a good classic ghost story, and I give it 4 stars. And the last novella I have to talk about is Christmas at Wheeldale Inn by Gemma Amor, and this is a horror novella, 111 pages. And I've mentioned this a couple times, but just in case you missed it, this was recommended by Jason over at Jason's Weird Reads. He reads a lot of horror books, so if you like horror, I definitely recommend checking out his channel. This was really fun, so creepy. In this, we follow a couple who is traveling by horse and carriage in this really awful snowstorm, but they're braving it because dude messed up and he's in a lot of debt, and they're about to come take him to jail. And so they're basically skipping town to get away from all of that. Well, they're in this horrendous snowstorm. The carriage ends up crashing and they can no longer travel that way, so they have to walk by foot. Well, they're basically gonna die out there, but by some miracle, they stumble upon this inn, the Wheeldale Inn, and they are able to finesse their way in there. And the innkeeper and the things that happen in the inn are not really what they seem. And this ended in an unexpected way, for me at least. I really enjoyed it. I was hooked from the very beginning. And if you like an unlikable male main character who may or may not get what he deserves, this one right here. I gave it 4 stars. And this is the novella that I left out of my initial recording of this video, and that is The Scourge Between Stars by Ness Brown, and this is a sci-fi horror set in space. It's 159 pages. And in this, we're following a starship that is coming back from a failed colony planet, and they're heading back to Earth. Well, there are high tensions on board because they are facing threats of starvation and the really treacherous minefield of interstellar space. Well, things get even worse because they start hearing really weird things coming from behind the walls, and then they start finding people are being picked off one by one in pretty gruesome, gory ways, and they find out that they have an unknown intruder aboard, and it gets pretty terrifying. It's really scary to think about. This was really fun. The only thing I would say I didn't really like about it is there is a mention of a little bit of propaganda in here, which is pretty common in modern sci-fi, I found, but I could look it over in this book for the most part because it was really only mentioned a couple times in passing. And I've noticed that this is brought up in modern sci-fi because it's like they need a catalyst for like a reason for them to go to another planet. It's like some catastrophic event happens on the planet, and I'm just not into that like anti-human propaganda. I can't really say what it is because otherwise I'll get that stupid banner on the bottom of my video saying to go to Wikipedia. Okay, Wikipedia, to learn about this one thing, because if you say anything against the mainstream narrative, well then, you have to be wrong. Anyway, so that was only mentioned a couple times in passing, so I can look past it. It's not really that big of a deal, but overall, I really did enjoy this book. And if you like a space sci-fi horror, something kind of like Alien in a little novella format, I would recommend this, and I gave it 4 stars. I have a little visitor here. Hopefully he will behave better if he's sitting on my lap. So the next 4 books are all pretty much interchangeable as far as the ranking goes. They're all 4 stars, so I really enjoyed all of these. And the first one I'm going to talk about is Into the Sublime by K.A. Borman. And I believe this is a YA horror, like a survival horror. And this is 359 pages. And this is a dual timeline. We start out in one timeline where a young lady is being interviewed by the cops because she is the only surviving girl who can also speak. And the other timeline is this group of young ladies who is, in this other timeline, we have a group of 4 young ladies who are thrill seekers. They basically have like a meetup group, and they're going to explore this cave system to look for a subterranean lake that they've only heard of through local legend and rumors. And they also say that the cave shows you your own personal fear. So not only do they have to deal with surviving the cave, but also facing their own personal fears, whatever that may be. This gets pretty creepy and trippy as well. I would even say it gives me similar vibes to Bunny or the Honeys, for example, just like a little bit, with how like it's a mix between real and surreal, and it's like you don't know who to trust and what their motives are. This was a really good one, and in one point they find themselves in pitch black, so I do have a little passage I'd like to share with you. The thing about the pitch dark is that there is no touchstone for time passing. 1 minute could well have been 10 or 30. What felt like an hour might have been significantly less. I alternated between being sure time was standing still, stretching out forever like black around us, and feeling like it was speeding by impossibly fast. The disorientation made my mind wander weird places. The dark was starting to feel like a living entity, one that pulsed and moved with us. And the more I thought about that, the more I could imagine it as something sentient, a kind of creature intent on keeping us disoriented, gaining something from our liminal state. So I really enjoyed this. Definitely better cave story than the Luminous Dead. If you are looking for a cave survival story, I recommend this one over that for sure. And like I said, 4 stars. And the next one I have to talk about is No Exit by Taylor Adams. And this is a thriller, 333 pages. This is a pretty popular one. Pretty much everybody that reads this loves it. I think I've only seen one person that didn't really like it. Fortunately, I did though. And in this, we follow a young lady who is driving to go visit her sick mom in the hospital. And she is driving through this horrendous snowstorm, but she has to go do it because her mom's not doing well and she wants to make it before she can't see her, or she's scared that something bad is going to happen. So she does what she can to get there, but then while she's driving, the road basically becomes totally impossible to drive on. So she happens to pull over near a rest stop, and luckily it's open. There's a few cars there. She goes inside and she talks to the people. They're like playing cards, playing on their phone, and one of the guys is like, of course, there's no phone service there or cell phone coverage in the building, but he says, oh, in this one spot out in the parking lot, I was able to get a little bit of a signal, so maybe you could try it. So she's like, okay, I'm gonna go out there. And she gets maybe like a bar for a second, but then it goes away. Well, while she's out there, she notices that there's a van out there, and in the back of the van, she sees a little girl's hand coming out of a cage. Like her hand in a cage, like in a crate basically in the back of the van. And she's like, oh, there's a little girl that's kidnapped here in the back of the van, and one of those people in there must have kidnapped her, but she doesn't know who it was. And there's like 3 people inside. So she goes inside and she has to play it cool, act like she doesn't know what's going on, but she's determined to save this little girl now. So it's kind of like a cat and mouse game. She doesn't know who did it, and then she starts having suspicions, and then things just get wild. They get wild, they get creepy, they get a little bloody. Definitely a fun, fast-paced read. If you're looking for a snowy, isolated thriller, that's a fast read. Definitely recommend. And like I said, this one is 4 stars. Then we have The Kingdom of Sweets by Erica Johansson. This is a fantasy, 351 pages, and this is a Nutcracker retelling. I listened to this partly via audiobook on Audible and partly physically, and when I read it physically, I played the Nutcracker music in the background. I'll link below the video that I played while reading this. It was really good. It had the whole Scourge, Tchaikovsky's music, and then it had a really cool, like, wintry, snowy scene that you could have on the screen. I love the Nutcracker, so this was a fun read for me. This is a dark version of it for sure. There's curses and magic involved, there's sibling rivalries, and there's some more adult themes that are talked about. Things that I was kind of surprised that were in this, but we also had, of course, the Nutcracker, and then Natasha, the main character, who ends up going to the Kingdom of Sweets, where everything's made of candy and sugar, and she meets the Sugar Plum Fairy and makes a deal with her, and as they say, you should be careful what you wish for. Well, she goes back into the real world, and things get a little crazy, and it almost seems like things kind of bleed over, like there's a mixing of the real and unreal going on in her life, and there's murder and deceit, and her mom is all messed up on laudanum all the time, and then her dad is committing infidelity all over the place. Just lots of toxic things happening. Bit of a dysfunctional family, I guess you could say. Definitely gives you that dark fairy tale vibe, so I really enjoyed it. 4 stars. And the last 4-star book I have to talk about is The 12 Days of Murder by Andreina Cordani. I think that's how you would say her name. It's a murder mystery, 375 pages, and think of this like the song 12 Days of Christmas mixed with a murder mystery dinner in a snowy, isolated setting, and people start getting picked off one by one, kind of like in the vein of Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None. And it has dual timeline, so we have 12 years prior, where we have this group of friends, we'll say loosely. There's a lot of drama involved there. 12 years ago, they have a murder mystery dinner, and one of them goes missing during this whole production, and they never hear from him or see him again, and they don't know what happened. Did he just take off because he wanted to go missing? Did he leave as a prank and then something bad happened, like an accident? Or did one of them actually do something? So they were kind of suspicious about each other, but nothing ever came from it. So then 12 years later, the guy's sister's like, all right, you know what? Let's have another one. Let's get together, have another murder mystery dinner. And so she puts it together out in this mansion out in the middle of nowhere. And of course, no cell service. And they all got together, they get their packets, they get their characters, the roles they're supposed to play, the clues they're supposed to give, and they go to bed for the first night, and there's supposed to be something that happens. I think later that night or early in the morning. Well, it turns out that one of them ends up actually dead. So they start freaking out because, you know, well, that's not really supposed to happen, and they don't know who did it, and then people just keep dying one by one, and they don't know who did it. They're suspicious of each other, but also they're scared to be alone, so they want to be all together. So it's a lot of suspicions being thrown around. I myself had my suspicion about a couple people in particular, but still, as I was reading, I was like, oh, maybe that person, but maybe that person, because the way that they do the dual timeline, you have the current timeline and then you go back, current timeline back. Well, each time you go back, it focuses on a different character. So you get a little bit more insight into that particular character's perspective and get a better idea maybe of their motives on, maybe their involvement in it or not. And there's actually two mysteries going on because you have the prior friend who went missing 12 years ago, and then you have the current timeline where people are being picked off one by one. And this is set over Christmas, so it's perfect for the holiday season. If you like it a little creepy, a little bloody, and you like a classic whodunit, I do recommend this, 4 stars. Oh, and I forgot to mention that the 12 Days of Murder, this was put on my radar by Victoria Sampley. It was the first channel I heard of it, so thank you to Victoria for letting me know about this. And the last book I have to talk about is a 5-star. This is an all-time favorite, and luckily this book lived up to the hype. I've had this book for 1.5 years, maybe almost 2 years. I got it right when I started watching BookTube, and the more reviews I heard, the more I put it off because it just intimidated me so much, because so many of the reviews were like, I don't know what I just read, that was really weird, it's hard to explain. And I was like, well, what? How can nobody, why does nobody understand what's going on in this book? Like, I don't want to be confused the whole time. And so I thought, you know what, I just need to wait until I'm in the right mental space, maybe until I've read enough certain things to understand what's going on. It has to do with a college setting and a master's program, and I know nothing about that. Like, that's not my life, never has been my life. So I thought it's all going to go over my head and I'm not going to get it. But I'm glad that I finally read it. I'm kind of mad. Not kind of mad that it took me so long to read it, but then at the same time I'm glad, because I feel like the timing really has a big impact on my reading experience, so I think it was just the right time for me to read it. And that is Bunny by Mona Awad. And this is a literary fiction, dark academia, maybe fantasy with a little bit of horror, honestly. And it's 305 pages. And in this we follow Samantha, the main character, and she is participating in an MFA program for creative writing. And she attends this workshop at school, and there's only 4 other students in this class, and they happen to be these 4 other girls who are really close friends, and they call themselves the Bunnies. And they're your standard, like, I'm too cool for you, I don't care about anybody else, really like tight-knit kind of clique of girls, and they don't really pay attention to anybody else. But one day Samantha piques their interest, and they're like, hey, you know what? You should come join us at our private workshop at one of the Bunnies' house. And Samantha has like an internal battle with this because she kind of hates them in one aspect, but then she also feels left out and wants to belong. And it's a little awkward that she's like the odd one out there in their workshop at school. And so she's like, I don't know if I want to go. Okay, yeah, I'll go. So she ends up going, and things are really weird. They're basically it's like cult-like, and they do really weird writing rituals. Yeah, really weird writing rituals, and weird things happen. And yes, bunnies are involved, like actual literal bunnies are involved in some way. And there's a lot of back and forth. Things get more and more unhinged. There is definitely a darker side to this story. Don't let the bright pink and the fluffy bunny fool you. And the quote at the beginning of the video is from this book, and that is one of the things it touches on, and because they're doing creative writing. And so that's what happens in the book. There's like a blur between reality and imagination. So that's the trippy part. Luckily, I was able to follow what was going on, and it was really fun. I was hooked the whole time, and it was a lot of fun, and I'll definitely be rereading it. Okay, friends, that will do it for my December wrap up. What did you think about these books? If you've read any of them, I would love to hear. And did any of these pique your interest and you've added them to your TBR? If you've made it this far into the video, you can leave me a bunny emoji in honor of my favorite book of the month, Bunny. And thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.